So welcome. I'm Stephen Pfolder. I've been teaching Dharma, Buddhist teachings, meditation, mindfulness for 25 years. And I've seen the amazing growth of mindfulness in the whole Western world, which has been quite an extraordinary phenomena. And at the beginning I was a little bit concerned about it from the point of view of its dilution and turned into something, a package which is rather minimal. But it is extraordinary that it's made such a change in medicine, in politics even. 120 British members of parliament have gone through mindfulness courses. I don't know whether it did any good or not. But in education and, of course, psychology, it's been huge. However, there has been issues and problems, and it has arrived in the Western world rather diluted. It's arrived with a tendency to turn into a kind of feel-better technique, a bit like going to the gym, except it's a mental gym. In a more subtle place, and I would say social, political place, it has had a tendency a little bit like Soma in the book 1984 by in which Soma is a kind of a pacifier of the masses to make sure they have a good time, they're relaxed, they're calm, and they don't make rebellion. And so it is, mindfulness has that problem that in a way it may be used to maintain the values, the consensus, and the problems that we face, rather than, in its original sense, something radical that makes change both in the person and in the world. And just a small example, in companies, mindfulness can be used just to make people feel a bit happier, but meanwhile the company is doing very unethical kind of bottom line activities which people are not reacting to. Same in the classroom. Classroom, the kids can be getting up and saying, we want change, we want to look again at things, or mindfulness can be calm down, feel good, everything's okay. So in order to look at that more carefully, I think first thing we have to do is to undo the word mindfulness. Mindfulness has been talked about as a thing. It's not a thing. We can't just say it's a thing and then judge it. Instead of that, we have to ask, what is it really? How is it used correctly or incorrectly? What is the direction and purpose that people use it for? What's their intentions behind it? What is the cultural context that mindfulness is used? What's the pressures of the society and the consensus? For example, inside the classroom, the consensus and the pressure of the culture, which mindfulness then has to conform to. So it's a bit like saying, judging mindfulness in a sense as an isolated thing is a bit like going to someone and saying, well, I don't like your cooking. And they say, well, I've only ever cooked hamburgers in my life. And say, why you cook only hamburgers? Well, because that's what the boss and my restaurant wanted. So I don't have anything more than that. So we really need to go beyond that and ask, what is really the cooking and why it's not fully manifested as the skill that in a way is the origin of mindfulness. So 2 words about mindfulness and its origin, which is important here. It's based on Buddhist teaching, traditional Buddhist teaching, which says that as a human being, we have the potential for huge freedom and liberation. But the place to look for that liberation is not somewhere else, but right in the heart of our experience. And if we look directly and clearly in the heart of our experience, we find ourselves much freer than we ever imagined. And it's based on awareness, and in a way, we're not free because we forget that we're aware, we forget our power, And so we end up functioning on automatic pilot. And so mindfulness is instead of functioning on automatic pilot. And it's remembering to be aware. In other words, we do know how to be aware, but we forget. The word sati, mindfulness, in the Pali language means remembering. It's remembering to wake up to our experience, to shine the light on what is our experience in the body, in the mind, in feelings, and in also our inner world and our outer world. The first words of the Buddha in the classic text on mindfulness, Satipatthana Sutta, is mindfulness is inside and outside. It's not just a technique to withdraw from the world and go back into ourselves. And so we have to ask, what is it that helps us to feel better in mindfulness? Why is it this feel-good factor of mindfulness? So it's not a technique to kind of recruit happiness, to invent happiness. The quality of feeling better in mindfulness is that because we live close to ourselves, we begin to meet how we really live and our actual life. And that makes us feel better instead of disconnecting from our life or drowning in anxieties, worries, concerns that come into us. Instead of that, we meet our real life. We connect. Mindfulness, the basis of mindfulness is connection. So I just want to read part of a poem from my book, What is Beyond Mindfulness, that just expresses this. Have you forgotten the edges of leaves, the soft fur of cats, myths in the shapes of clouds, the stillness of the moon, the song of the wind, your own soft breath dissolving the boundary between you and the world? Have you forgotten that your troubled mind still loves stars and can see the pain behind another's eyes? Can you allow yourself to love yourself just the way you are and do the same with every stranger on the road? So I'm reading this poem because it shows some of the qualities of mindfulness that we shouldn't forget. Qualities that, firstly, are inner and outer, connecting us to the world, the stars, a stranger in the street, the pain of others. Secondly, mindfulness has in it kindness and compassion. It's already there. Thirdly, mindfulness has in it the sense of allowing both pleasant and unpleasant experiences and not trying to control the world in order for us to get happy experiences all the time. And another point is mindfulness is, it's important, a power that welcomes what arises, to give us the readiness to be with what is, rather than turning ourselves away, running away, hiding from, or shutting down. It's allowing, it's being open. That's in the poem, that's in the essence of mindfulness as well. Now, in the tradition, mindfulness is always part of a much bigger practice context. So it's one of the eightfold path, which when the Buddhist tradition says, how do you actually free yourself? There is a path, and it has 8 parts to it. Mindfulness is just one of the 8 paths, which include, for example, right speech, learning to what is speech, what is a thought, what is intention, what is our view, how to act in the world, and so on. Mindfulness is, for example, one of the 5 powers, and I have a new book out on the 5 powers, mindfulness is just one, and it's combined with trust and energy and calm and concentration and wisdom. So in that context, what happened, mindfulness arrived in the West and became really the only, it extracted itself, or the West invited mindfulness in and left behind many of the other qualities, powers, potentials, and practices which should be linked with mindfulness. So mindfulness was in a way extracted from its context in order to import it from the East into the West. And there's many reasons why the West needed some practice to, in a way, change from the old religions of the Western religions that lost their power. The West is an individualistic culture. So mindfulness is a practice that the individual can do at home or in a group and transform individually. The West isn't so interested in the community context of mindfulness. And the West is functional, material, and busy with self-development. And mindfulness just fits that beautifully. But it's self-development of the mind. So the West invited mindfulness in and left the rest behind. But it is the way that a teaching from elsewhere always goes into a culture. When Buddhism arrived in Tibet, it arrived in a very minimal way from some wild Indian sadhus that brought Buddhist teachings into the West in a rather minimal way. When Buddhism arrived in China and Japan, it arrived in a minimal way, because that's the way teachings arrive in new places. They can't arrive as a whole total package new. They come in like through the door, they open the door, and they insert themselves a bit like yoga came into the West and became very minimal as physical exercises, hatha yoga, instead of the whole Indian spiritual teaching that is yoga. So because of that, myself and many other teachers who are deeply, deeply into the essence of mindfulness and its Buddhist context have actually felt very good about the way mindfulness has arrived in the West. I didn't used to be like that. I was rather worried and cynical and concerned about the dilution and about the abuse and so on. But I think it's time to be positive and trusting and say the way mindfulness came into the West is helpful. It's time to be here. It's right. It's helping many, many, many people, including in the classrooms and including in households all over the Western world, helping many, many people to feel empowered that they can transform. They have something to do, that they can make a change. So for many people, mindfulness is a gate. But for millions, it's a gate so that some can go through the gate into the garden. And of those millions, some will go through the gate and begin to explore more deeply beyond the minimal mindfulness. And because of that, I think it's basically a positive thing, even in small doses. So what people can cope with, the small dose, fair enough, start with that. So what are we going to do to transform the situation and help mindfulness to overcome the kind of limitations, abuses, and problems that I mentioned at the beginning? The first thing is to really get familiar with what mindfulness really is, instead of limiting it to a very minimal package of self-development. And one of the places that is right there in the heart of the mindfulness itself is that ethics. The whole thing doesn't work without ethics. If you're a soldier and you're practicing mindfulness, but you're doing it in order to kill people more effectively, something there isn't going to work. It's just undoing itself. And what will happen, I don't know. but something there. In the old tradition, it's like as if you're trying to row a boat and the boat's always tied to the bank. You don't get anywhere because you're really causing suffering and harm to yourself and the world, and mindfulness is just being used or abused in this way. So ethics is a ground. If soon as you really open what is mindfulness, you will find it there as a basis. And secondly, mindfulness, if you look at it, it's an excellent basis for going out in the world. And so many, many, many people who have been practicing mindfulness and exploring mindfulness become peacemakers, become healers, go into ecological work. For example, the mindfulness teachers are at the forefront of the Extinction Rebellion movement. So mindfulness gives you a sense of freedom to be able to go out in the world and make change. And you'll see it if you look closely at what mindfulness is. A sense of empowerment. I am aware of, I'm not functioning on automatic. I'm aware of others. I'm aware of myself. Like in my poem, I see the pain behind another's eyes. I will go out and help them. So mindfulness has in it that sense of energizing us or purifying the blocks and the issues that make us helpless and allow us to go out. It has in it already compassion, but people forget this. I once visited Mark Williams, gave a talk at the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, and Professor Mark Williams has developed a very beautiful package and a teaching package, MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, especially for people with depression. And I asked him, what's the role of compassion in MBCT? And he said the whole thing doesn't work without it. It's utterly, utterly needed. And so as soon as you really kind of scrape the surface of mindfulness, you will see that it has compassion and kindness built in. In other words, if you're looking at your inner life, if you continue to be critical, attacking yourself, struggling, and so on, your mindfulness isn't really going to work. Mindfulness depends on you embracing your life and embracing your experience and being kind to yourself and then kind to others. So mindfulness connects us with the world. As I mentioned, it is about being aware of inner and outer worlds, not withdrawing, not shutting down. There is nothing in mindfulness that tells us to shut down. It can be, for a while, helpful, yes, to shut down a little bit. In other words, it can be helpful to sit quietly for half an hour in your room, take up the telephone, of course. But this is making an adjustment to give us the space to, yes, withdraw a little bit so that we can go back to our life, rather than being swept by the craziness and the busyness and the speediness and being swept away all the time. So there's an adjustment that's needed, and that adjustment, meaning coming back to yourself and turning towards your experience, can need a little bit of withdrawal, but that's just an adjustment. And very soon, hopefully soon, practicing mindfulness, you begin to realize that mindfulness is in and out. It's my life and other people's life. It's how I am and the pain of the world. It's where I feel difficulty and how injustice and conflict is out there in the world and is painful. And mindfulness gives you the power to see that. So it's very important that we can't control, and we can let go of the control of what mindfulness ought to be, because we're just not in control. The fate is in control, karma is in control. But what we can do, what we should do, is to make sure that the teachers and the leaders are deeply educated in what is mindfulness. And hopefully the teachers need teachers in schools that teach it, teachers in groups that teach it. There we need to work and kind of really encourage the sense that they're not doing justice to the inner freedom that's possible if you do a quickie. A quick training, couple of weeks, mindfulness, and go out and teach. You're not doing justice. There's a pain in that as well. That message has to be passed over. And I'm doing that constantly. I'm teaching the teachers of mindfulness in Israel. And I teach MBSR teachers constantly. And I teach them to realize that there is a much bigger world in this world of mindfulness. And that's my role, and that's what I enjoy. One of the things I enjoy is teaching teachers and giving them a sense of the bigness, the vastness of what it is that they've got beyond technique and beyond a minimal package. So at the same time, teachers should manifest and be examples of what mindfulness can help you to become. To go beyond issues of race, issues of labeling, issues of religion, issues of personal history, issues of conflict. For example, in America, there's many black teachers who are teaching in the black community because the Anglo-Saxon community realized that they don't have a good language to get out to the black community. The black community needs to own its mindfulness. And so that's happening in Oakland and other places in America, which I think is very positive. I've tried to teach Palestinians here in Israel, and it's possible, but there needs to be Palestinian teachers to teach mindfulness in that culture. So that's one of the ways forward. Another point is the radical nature of mindfulness. It should be understood as being pretty radical because it's opening the truth of things. So if you're in a classroom as a student and you see that the whole system is contaminated, is controlling, is restricting, is a kind of a prison, that the society is operating like that, the Buddha said, confront the truth. Confront the truth of things. Actually, the Buddha said, be an island to yourself. In other words, stand your ground and stand on your truth, and from that place, go out in the world. Don't be swept away by the consensus, by the norms, by what everybody agrees, by the mind of the herd. Don't be swept away. The Buddha said it very clearly. How do you not be swept away? Because you stand on your truth. I meet my breath. I meet my body. I meet my mind. I take responsibility for what's going on in this person. And because of that, I can stand my place and I can make change in the world. So mindfulness is very radical in that sense, and that should be understood and allowed, even if it's sometimes opening a Pandora's box. Better that this society is in critical place. The whole civilization is in a way collapsing. The society is in critical change and struggle, and we need people who are basically able to go out and make change. And mindfulness is can empower that. So one of the places also to understand is actually to invite a little bit the context from which mindfulness came from. It's like, as I say, if you want to cook properly, go and see how the Indians do it, and then you'll be able to cook curries, not just hamburger. So the traditional aspects, for example, the 5 powers, which I wrote about, which is my new book. One of the powers is the power of trust. Now, the power of trust goes along with mindfulness. It's not already, it's partly in there, but it's extending mindfulness to a place of trust. We really need it in today's world, when there is a tendency with the virus and with the ecology and with the climate change and with the insecurity of politics for everybody to get lost in anxiety, in panic, in insecurity, and in helplessness. And how to develop trust is a really important quality which we can learn from the tradition going along with mindfulness. One of the powers, the 5 powers, is trust. We can learn it. So touching mindfulness, that's really arrived in the Western world. Now let's invite trust. Let's invite wisdom. Let's invite calm, samadhi, concentration. So the wisdom mind is the mind of allowing change that is deep, that is in the personality, that is not just technique, but to sense that mindfulness with wisdom can really change the way we get up in the morning, we look at the world, we act in the world from a bigger place. And the final thought, in the tradition, the model is the model of feeding. It has there's a nutritional model in the Buddhist teaching, which many people don't know so well, but it's right there in the heart of the teaching. Meaning, instead of fighting, struggling against inner problems that you have or outer problems that you see, the nutritional model will say, feed the freedom and don't feed our problems or issues. So you have a problem like judgmental mind, sense of being victim, sense of being critical or judgmental. Instead of fighting this inner pattern, you feed your freedom and you just don't feed the problem. Attachment, non-attachment, is the language in the Western world, but in the Buddhist world, upadana is feeding. It's the word that attachment has been translated from upadana. So there's something in this whole tradition which is very healing. And it's feeding the solutions and not feeding the problems, rather than being part of conflict, attacking in the name of mindfulness or in the name of change, attacking them, anger, rage, conflict in the name of a better society or a better human being. So I think it's quite an important way to look at mindfulness, the nutritional model. And final word, mindfulness takes us beyond. We shouldn't forget that it's fundamentally a spiritual journey. So this doesn't need to put it way beyond most human beings, because I believe most human beings have in their core, in their center, an appreciation of their spirit, the pure spirit inside. In whatever dose we have it, but it is there, and we need to acknowledge it, and mindfulness can help with that. Thank you.